Bory Boy and Feather Mop were implicated many a times in warfare with gangs led by revenge-seeking JLP enforcers such as Claudius Massop, Carl Byar Mitchell and Curly Locks, some of the top political enforcer in Tivoli Gardens and Rima, at the time. The result was always carnage and unbridled bloodshed as the JLP strongmen, in the name of reprisal, attacked and assaulted PNP supporters living in surrounding communities. The practice of issuing contracts based on political affiliation is no new phenomenon. It was alive and well even in the 60s and 70s, with Bory Boy and his cronies being major beneficiaries. One particular contract which came to public attention was one for the cleaning of the Lilford Gully, which was damaged by floodwaters. According to accounts, Feather Mop had won the contract and information had leaked that he was paid twice the amount that the contract was valued. It was even more shocking to the public when it was revealed that the notorious gangster-turned-contractor had not even paid the workers who were responsible for the cleaning of the gully. This incident proved embarrassing for the PNP, and Manley was forced to call in the police to investigate the matter. However, regarding the misappropriation of these public funds, it is not clear if anyone was in fact arrested in this incident. According to one elder from their era, Feather Mop was a known troublemaker, always a bad up people for money and a threatened them life and them ting day, just for him ting dat, and because him did have the protection of the big man, him just do what him please, when him want, but every dog and puss have them 4 o'clock, and from him did go Cuba and disrespect Castro, that was it. They had to get rid of him did too damn unruly, he lamented. There were forces to be reckoned with, and even in death, Bory Boy lived up to his bravado, when on Sunday, March 23rd, the day of his funeral, he again made headlines when he brought out the likes of then Prime Minister and the leader of the PNP, Michael Manley, along with several other cabinet members, who led the funeral procession of over 20,000 mourners in his honor, a clear indicator of the side he had taken, and just how much he was valued and regarded in said circle. The irony of it all. The late Prime Minister Michael Manley, at a news conference at the Jamaica Conference Centre on March 15, 1992, where he announced his intention to resign as Prime Minister and President of the PNP, had this to say when asked if there was anything he had done during his administration that he regretted. He said, "The biggest mistake of judgment he ever made as the head of the party was to have attended the gun salute funeral of PNP badman, Winston Bory Boy Blake, because it had sent the wrong signal to the people, for whom he, Mr. Manley, was a role model." Note: this was 17 years after the fact. It must also be noted that the funeral procession of Bory Boy came under heavy gunfire as it made its way past Tivoli Gardens en route to the Maypen Cemetery, a development that resulted in 8 persons being shot and injured. Aston Bucky Marshall Dennis was another early member of the infamous bloodletting circle. Bucky Marshall was a PNP supporter and an enforcer from his latter teenage years, in the late 1960s. His power however increased when Michael Manley, the then leader of the PNP, became Prime Minister of Jamaica in 1972. Almost immediately Manley embarked on a socialist agenda intended to redistribute wealth by privatizing the nation's major export industries. His agenda proved to be financially unsustainable, as his policies deterred foreign investment in Jamaica, which led to unemployment and shortages of basic products. Opposition to his policies was widespread, but beginning in 1974, the opposition went into high gear when it came in the form of the JLP's more conservative, Edward Seaga. This was the time of major political tension, and things escalated for the worst with the addition of the Chuckies, as they were called back then, the equivalent of today's shotters, who were said to have quickly found favor with the political leadership of both parties, the JLP and the PNP. Bucky was one of those young men who was both respected and feared by those who knew or even heard of him, and with this level of notoriety in and outside of his community, he became ideal in keeping things in check for the new political puppet masters, who kept him and his cronies motivated with all that they were unable to provide for themselves. What came next may eventually be considered one of the worst political moves in Jamaica's history, as both political parties were said to have, and in some cases, known to have hired local gangsters to help them increase their hold on power in their respective constituencies. Bucky Marshall was said to have been one of those recruited. He had the pedigree and reputation, typical of the thugs of his era, carrying out and being accused of all manner of evils. Bucky hailed from the community of Arnett Gardens, the housing project once better known as Concrete Jungle. Said to have been brutal from his youth, it is also said that Bucky Marshall got his name from his weapon of choice, a sawed-off shotgun, which the streets at the time referred to as a bucky. He was a political enforcer aligned to the People's National Party, who intimidated the residents of Arnett Gardens on their behalf, warning them at times, even at gunpoint, of what the end result would be, if they should indeed withdraw their support from Michael Manley, and not vote for the PNP and its candidates. However, his real claim to fame, ironically, is not that of a gun-tooting murderous thug, but on the contrary, was that he was instrumental in the formulation of the very idea that led to Jamaica's first One Love Peace concert, a plan, which was orchestrated by two gangsters from rival political factions, who by sheer happenstance, found themselves in the precarious position of sharing a jail cell, and who it seemed, both wanted to bring the violence to an end. Call it an epiphany, but Claudie Massop, JLP, and Aston Bucky Marshall, PNP, together decided that enough was enough and that the best way to bring the country together was to use music as a uniting factor and organize a major concert. Quickly realizing that Bob Marley was a critical element upon which their success depended, Massop, upon his release from jail, flew to London in 1977 along with other figures from the underworld, to convince the reggae superstar to perform at the event. Marley accepted the invitation and this marked his first performance in Jamaica since he was almost assassinated at his home, now the Bob Marley Museum, in 1976. Unfortunately, as successful and revered as the concert was, climaxed by the epic and legendary handshake between political rivals, Edward Seaga and Michael Manley, truth be told, it did very little in terms of quelling the political tension and violence that had been plaguing the nation. Plus, according to some sources, there were those in the inner circle of the peace talks and effort, who talked the talk, but walked a totally different path. And to further complicate matters, with the events and peace efforts two main organizers and key architects, Massop and Marshall, being slain within 2 years of the famous concert, things soon fell into the hands of those who had a totally different agenda. Massop was killed by police in Jamaica in 1979 and Bucky Marshall was gunned down by unknown assailants on March 8 of the same year in a New York City nightclub after fleeing Jamaica. In addition, what many people may not even know, was that it was on that same stage, that very night, that Jacob Killer Miller brought to center stage some of the main gang leaders in Kingston at the time, Claudie Massop, Tony Welsh, Bucky Marshall, and Tech Life, in an effort of projecting the unity that they were endorsing. According to sources, with the fall of many who were politically affiliated, Bucky had seen the writing on the wall, and then add the fact that the same leader he had backed for as long as he could remember, changing gears without warning, not only building a prison, the gun court, but also activating police squads. The Echo Squad, which seemed as if their ultimate agenda was to get rid of all those who at one point seemed so relevant to the cause, and with all these developments, it became clear what time it was, at least in Bucky's mind. Some have even gone as far as suggesting that Bucky's death was a sanctioned hit. He had done too much and knew too much. A new day was dawning. The old guard had to go. However, no evidence has ever surfaced to establish or refute that claim. Note, The gun court became a reality in 1974 after a series of murders associated with criminal gangs and political divergence between supporters of the feuding parties. It however wasn't until the murder of attorneys and businessmen later that year that the issue seemed to take on new life. Milton Anthony Tego Welsh was a PNP activist and enforcer in the community of Arnett Gardens and Rema. He was also known to have dabbled in the music industry, even producing singles for the likes of Barrington Levy and Linval Thompson. At one point it was said that Welsh was the owner and operator of a sound system by the name of Socialist Roots, later renamed Popper Roots. Welsh's exploits pretty much orbits around the same political sun, and like all his compatriots, was no saint. It was said that when the lion in the jungle roared, there was no sound. It was one voice, and it was the Don's voice. Some view Welsh as the one who got away, because unlike most of his compatriots that met violent and early deaths, Welsh was able to escape the bullet and live out his life, passing away in August of 2017, at the age of 67. After all the tribal war, and what he is said to have viewed as the blatant assassinations of both Claudie and Bucky, Welsh, it is said, became a very hard man to find, as if in hiding, before eventually migrating to the United States. In retrospect, it's obvious why he would have feared for his life, taking into consideration the untimely demise of his two associates, but even with such justified rationale, there are other accounts that say Welsh had gotten scarce, but for other reasons, namely the now infamous Anthony General Starkey Dingle and his Wild Bunch crew. A crew made up of names such as Natty Kunder, Natty Chris, Radcliffe, and Stella, the new guns in town. It is said that Starkey, alongside his sidekick Hutch, who it is said later became Willie Haggart of Black Rose's fame, were the main instigators behind Welsh's exodus. The view was, his principles were old school. Welsh was for peace, but there was a war going on, and since he wasn't singing the same song or even skanking to the same rhythms they were, influential as he was, Welsh became both an obstacle and a target. It was what it was, out with the old and in with the new, and in order to survive, he became extremely scarce, even avoiding the community until his eventual migration, where it is said, he became a major part of a fraction of the Spangler's Posse organization, a significantly smaller and less organized iteration of the Shower Posse. From all accounts, even with jail time involved, Welsh did well for himself, acquiring several commercial and residential properties locally during his extended stay abroad. It is even rumored that he was the co-owner of a once prominent grocery store chain. It's uncertain when he returned to the island, but one thing is for sure, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, because even in his 60s, Welsh was still active politically, to the point of even being charged for the stabbing death of Damien Hussey, a 21-year-old man who was killed in Golden Spring in St Andrew, where Welsh lived, following a PNP rally in 2006. Dennis Copper Bath. Copper was born on Bond Street in West Kingston, and may not have been on what many Jamaicans remember as the infamous wanted flyer of 1980. He was already dead by then, but although he did not make that infamous list, you will find little debate regarding who held that coveted title, Public Enemy #1, in the 1970s. A member of the Hot Stepper gang out of East Kingston, which also included the likes of yet another of Jamaica's most notorious names, George Flash. Copper, who was an active member of the underworld from a tender age, received 2 life sentences before he was 18 years old, for the murder of 2 police officers, who he took out at a bar on Rum Lane in the city's capital. Copper however managed to escape from the general penitentiary after being sentenced, not once, but twice. Bath's gang had its roots in Central and East Kingston, but was a known associate of other notorious figures hailing from West Kingston, where he was born, which included Donovan Chinky and Dennis Shaboudaire, a former jockey, who was banned from Caymanas Park in 1974 for irregular activities and quite possibly the main instigator in Copper's final hurrah. Hot Stepper Gang, immortalized in song by reggae artist Heine Kamaz's 1995 hit, Here Comes the Hot Stepper. Interesting fact, Heine Kamazi, although not born in West Kingston, at one point in his life, actually moved to Bond Street as a youth, the same street that Copper was born on and frequented, so it gives to reason that Kamazi may have been drawing from real-life episodes. Besides his reputation as a cold-blooded murderer, Copper was also a prolific robber. Before Copper, Jamaican criminals kept it basic, brute force and violence, but Copper was different. He did all that and then some. Copper was killed by law enforcement while attempting to pull off his biggest caper yet, robbing the Caymanas Park racecourse, located in Portmore, St. Catherine. He, along with 9 members of his gang, attempted a daring $100,000 hold-up at the venue. However, he was fatally shot and killed by cops on duty, but not before injuring 2 others, one of whom died later. At the time of his death, he was listed by the police as Jamaica's most wanted. The police reportedly removed 101 rounds of ammunition, 2 submachine magazines, and 2 revolver holsters from Copper's person. The robbery attempt was carried out on the Saturday evening of April 29, 1978, at the end of a lucrative race day. It is said that Copper, in his fearless fashion, led the alliance of gangsters to a room where large sums of cash was being stored, but he never managed to leave the racecourse alive. Upon making his entry into the room of cash, he was said to have grabbed a bag with cash, but was immediately shot in the stomach by one of the injured police officers, whom he, Copper, had shot, and whom he apparently thought was dead. As heroic as the efforts of the police officer were, his efforts amounted to too little, too late, succumbing to his injury in a tragic, ironic twist, which found his body, alongside Copper's, at the morgue, that very evening. It is also said that Copper, upon realizing the extent of his injuries, and realizing that the odds of him getting out alive were slim, tossed guns to his cronies, bidding them to make their escape while he held off the police with submachine fire, finger on the trigger to the end.